Sitting here on a Thursday morning, 6:05, monitoring, obviously, a tragedy from last night in Washington, D.C., where a passenger jet with 64 on board collided with an Army helicopter just seconds from landing at Reagan Airport. Right now, as we look at the scene on the Potomac River, the sun is rising, of course, along the East Coast, where it's 7:05 right now. And the search is ongoing in what is being considered really impossible conditions. That's what's happening right now as this story unfolded last night, just around 9 o'clock our time, maybe a little earlier, is when this felt like it started to pick up steam and gain national attention. And this plane, of course, was coming in from Wichita, Kansas. We were scheduled to have Roger Marshall on the show at 7:05. That has been postponed until further notice, as the senator has been up all hours of the night gathering information on what exactly happened with this flight coming in from Wichita to Reagan International, a flight that many of us in the Kansas City area have probably done before. You know, when you go into Reagan International, it's a much easier airport to access D.C. from than Dulles. And for those of you who fly to Washington, D.C., you know you do not want to get stuck going to Dulles. Reagan is a much easier airport. You get on an Uber, and you are 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, depending on traffic, down to the Capitol. That's really what the airport is meant for, people that have to go to Washington, D.C. And it is a very tight airport to navigate. I talked to a couple of pilots last night, and they all told me the same thing. That airport is a very difficult one to navigate because there are a bunch of no-fly zones due to obvious reasons with Washington, D.C. So we don't have all the answers right now, of course. We are just getting reports as they unfold this morning. We'll get them to you on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We have reached out to our friends down in Wichita as well to try to get some answers down there. So it is going to be a developing morning. We will hear from you at 913-408-7957. But last night, Peter Muntian on CNN did an outstanding job as a guy with a lot of experience in this field explaining what may have happened and how this may have unfolded and why this tragedy seemed to unfold the way it did, with this airline flying in from Wichita, literally seconds away from landing. They were a half mile out from the airport. That's the estimation. Just do the math on that. You're not talking about a minute, 2 minutes away. You're talking about seconds away from that plane being on the ground. And here's Peter Muntian, CNN, last night.
And so the helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, appeared to be coming from the right of the commercial flight that was descending into runway 33. It's a particularly perilous situation for pilots because they can often not see very well below them, as helicopter crews are often looking at the ground, flying primarily in reference to the ground, especially in a very critical phase of flying as a crew is descending, making that final critical approach to landing. They are focused primarily on the runway and primarily on their instruments. They're not necessarily looking left and right, scanning for other traffic. This may be something where the crew simply just did not have the ability to see the helicopter and the situation unfolding in front of them.
That's Peter Muntian, CNN, late last night, and he provided even more context into what exactly happened, how this may have unfolded, and why this appears at this point in time to just be an incredible tragedy, wrong place, wrong time for everybody involved.
There are so many blind spots in an airplane, and a crew on approach, this is not the same type of airplane, this is slightly different, but a crew on approach into a runway, they're typically looking at the runway. I can tell you as a pilot and a flight instructor, you are intensely focused on what is unfolding in front of you. not a lot of times you're looking left and right for other airplanes, or in this case, helicopters. This is a very, very congested piece of airspace. So as the flight was descending, it's possible that they may have not been able to see a helicopter apparently coming from their right. And it's possible also that the systems on board in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, may have not been able to even warn them of an impending collision happening right in front of them.
That's, once again, Peter Munty and CNN. We also know, as you heard from John Anthony, top of the hour news, the elite American figure skaters were on board that flight that suffered the midair collision last night and crashed into the Potomac River. 2 Russian world champions also among the passengers on this American Eagle flight. U.S. Figure Skating has said the athletes were returning from a training camp down in Wichita.
Yeah, my wife and I had actually seen some on TV. I can't remember if it was the weekend or whatever. There was an ice skating championship event down there prior to that. And the thing that hit me when I heard the news of 60 people on the flight, that seemed like a lot coming out of Wichita to me. I thought, boy, I hope a team is not involved in that. And apparently that's the situation.
Yeah, the airline, the American Eagle Flight 5342, carrying 60 passengers, 4 crew members, held up to 78 people, so probably one of those 2 seats on either side type planes that is going to get you a direct flight from Wichita into DCA. And we have a statement here from the sports body saying these athletes, coaches, and family members were returning home from the National Development Camp held in conjunction with the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. We are devastated by this unspeakable tragedy and hold the victims' families closely in our hearts. That is the report this morning, the official statement this morning from that sports body. John Roberts is reporting right now from the scene along the Potomac River on Fox News. If we could pull that up there, Mark. Once again, John Roberts, Fox News, right along the Potomac River this morning.
A little bit up the way, we see the Coast Guard helicopters flying here all the time. So they are well equipped to respond to an emergency like this. But it's still such a shock to the system here in Washington, D.C., that something like this happens. It was back in 1982, the last time that a plane went down in the Potomac River. You'll remember the Air Florida flight. And so much going on today in D.C. as well, with confirmation hearings for the FBI director nominee, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard as well for ODNI. Those hearings, as we understand, are going to go ahead today because, as Tom Cotton was saying, as Sean Duffy was saying, it really drives home the importance of the president having his national security team and all of his support staff and advisors in place. Because when you've got to respond to something like this, you want to make sure that you've got your team in place.
Sure.
Now, as for how this happened, you heard Lucas Tomlinson talking about it a little bit earlier. These planes come in and out of Reagan all day. They do share airspace, a very crowded airspace, with a lot of official helicopters as well, whether they be Army. Park Police helicopter came over us just a little while ago. Again, the Coast Guard is flying here. We always see the President's Marine One helicopters training out of Joint Base Balling. It is very, very crowded airspace. Clearly, there's no civilian aircraft that are flying in the area because of severe flight restrictions. But you do get a lot of official aircraft and commercial aircraft coming in and out of here. And every time you fly in, because particularly if you come from the north with that meandering river route for security and noise abatement reasons, you wonder, is something going to go wrong? Could something go wrong here? Because it is a very tenuous approach. From the south, it's a lot easier. But no, I mean, whoever would have thought that there would be a collision between 2 aircraft, because it's just so tightly regulated here, Brian, that something like this.
So, John,
I've never known anything like this to happen in this area.
That's John Roberts, Fox News, reporting. We'll be monitoring all morning long as we are likely to get press conferences from officials throughout the morning, as once again, 64 individuals on board. That's 4 crew members, 60 passengers on this passenger jet from Wichita, colliding seconds before landing at Reagan International in Washington, D.C. with an Army helicopter in a midair crash. We'll keep you posted this morning. Pete Mundo on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We are streaming all morning long as well on the KCMO Talk Radio app, 913-408-7957. Well, Roger Marshall was one of the first on the scene last night, Kansas U.S. Center, and he was providing updates all night long on this awful midair plane crash that happened on this flight from Wichita, seconds from landing, colliding with a Black Hawk helicopter. And we do now have an update that in about 10 minutes, Washington, D.C. officials are going to be giving an update on this plane crash. So we will carry that for you here on KCMO Talk Radio. Is that Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy? Is that live right now? Okay, let's go to Sean Duffy. He just got confirmed in the last couple of days as the Transportation Secretary. Oh, did they cut away? Is he still there or no?
I guess they went back.
Okay, they went back. See if it's on the Unanchored channel. Just keep me posted on that. That's totally fine. Roger Marshall last night reporting in the last few hours. I'm on the scene at DCA talking to officials while we wait for more answers. Please join me in prayer. If anyone has someone in Wichita looking for information about potential family or friends on the flight, American Airlines has set up this hotline that's 800-679-8215, 800-679-8215. And the senator adding in a follow-up post, we will continue to work through the night to get answers alongside federal, state, and local officials. Pray for Kansas. Pray for the passengers, pilots, the first responders, rescue crews, and their families. Speaking of the families, there was a young man, Hamad Raza, who was interviewed by CBS 9 in Washington, D.C. last night. His wife was on that plane in one of the most tragic, gut-wrenching interviews you can see because it is so relatable. Here it is from CBS 9.
I'm just praying that somebody's pulling her out of the river right now as we speak. That's all I can pray for. I'm just praying to God.
When was the last time you spoke with her?
She texted me that they were landing in 20 minutes.
Can you show us a text message that you got from her?
Landing in 20 minutes. The rest of my text did not get delivered. That's when I realized something might be up.
How many times have you done that? Whether you've sent the text or you've been on the receiving end of that text, right? We all pull out our phone when the plane's about to land, moments away from hitting the ground, saying, landing soon, or just landed. I know they tell us to not take out our cell phones when they're landing, but let's be honest. You've done it, and I've done it. And you send a text to your loved one, and you say, hey, should be on the ground momentarily. And you don't think anything of it. You do it because that's what we do. We're programmed, our lives are on these phones, and we're trying to give people a heads up. We've been on the receiving end. We've been on the sending end of that, John, numerous times.
Well, it seems to be a remedy for the parking situation here in town.
Well, that's true as well.
So people park in the cell lot, so you want to give them a heads up.
Yeah.
You know, they've got a few yards to cover to get there to get to you.
Exactly. That's so true. It's an easy way to kind of expedite the process of pickup. So we all do it. And if you've ever picked up or dropped off at Reagan, it's also very helpful because they've got a pretty tight little loop there, depending on which airline you're on, to get picked up and dropped off. It's kind of like the old KCI, actually, where it's like, you know, a semicircle roundabout, whatever you want to call it, and you pick people up along the curb. That's how DCA Reagan is set up. So the idea that you would get that text from a loved one, you would send text messages back to your spouse in this case. They wouldn't go through. And then your heart absolutely sinks when you start hearing the news. That is as tragic as you could ever fathom. And that is exactly what Hamad Raza was dealing with last night when talking to CBS 9. The water temperature in the Potomac, 37 degrees, which obviously is not good, not where you want to be right now. With this weather that has just swept across the entire United States and brought these awful temperatures to the country over the last, couple of weeks or so, that's not helping the cause at all. I mean, to put that into perspective, we did that polar plunge last week at Longview Lake. Now, the Longview Lake water temperature was below freezing. There was ice all over the place. But even at 37, 38 degrees, I mean, you're not lasting, according to officials early this morning, for hours on end. That being said, you are still seeing search and rescue in the Potomac River right now at 7:25 on the East Coast. The sun is rising. We are just a few minutes away from D.C. officials giving an update on this plane collision. It will be that first official update in quite some time, so we will make sure we carry that for you when it does begin here in a few minutes on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio. And as always, we're streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. President Trump put out a statement on Truth Social 7 hours ago. The airplane was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airplane for an extended period of time. It is a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? This is a bad situation that looks like it should have been prevented. Not good. And the president following up in a post, what a terrible night this has been. God bless you all. So that is the last we have heard from President Trump on this issue. I imagine we'll get some more this morning as we get more information. The sun rises. But interesting point there as well to note that we're not dealing with incredible fog, right? We are dealing with a clear night in Washington, D.C. And if you haven't seen the video of what is now clearly this helicopter, this Black Hawk helicopter going right into the plane, we're talking moments before it lands at Reagan Airport. It's like it just didn't see it. And you can't put it on the plane. The pilot doesn't have, he can't look at his blind spot like you and I driving in the car, and there's no reason for him to. This appears to be very much on the helicopter and maybe air traffic control, but right now that part of it is very speculative, so we won't go there at this point in time. Washington, D.C. officials will be giving updates in just minutes on the latest on this Wichita plane that crashed over the Potomac after colliding midair with a Black Hawk helicopter. We will carry that press conference for you right here on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio, also all morning long on 7:10 a.m. and the KCMO Talk Radio app. Well, let's get to Wichita this morning, where right now a press conference is beginning after this tragic plane crash last night over the Potomac River. This American Airlines plane coming in from Wichita and crashing with a Black Hawk helicopter moments before landing. No survivors are expected. 64 people on that airplane. Mayor Lily Wu in Wichita is right now addressing the nation. Let's go down to Wichita and hear what she's saying. Looks like she's handing it off to Congressman Ron Estes.
And thank you for all of the city council members for holding this press conference to help share this information. This is such a tragic day for our community. So many of us will be touched by people that we know directly or indirectly that were victims of this tragic tragedy that happened. Overnight I was in contact with the White House Situation Room, getting updates as they were going through the process. Spoke last night with the chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board as well. And at that point in time, their investigation was they were getting prepared for that, but they were waiting for the search and rescue efforts to conclude before they started that investigation. So I know this is going to be a tragedy that touches our community. We have such a steep history of being involved in aviation. And being a close-knit community like we are, it's going to have consequences for years to come. I do want to make a general comment about air safety in general. I mean, we have the safest skies in any country in the world. And when a tragic incident like this happens, obviously we want to do the investigation, which will take days and weeks to go through that process, and to make sure that we can prevent accidents like this from happening in the future. And so I appreciate all of the updates we'll have this morning. I know there'll be more coming out, both from here in Wichita as well as in D.C. Thank you.
Congressman Ron Estes there. Back to Mayor Wu.
Congressman, We also have a representative for Senator Jerry Moran, who will share a statement as well.
Senator Jerry Moran has a representative taking the podium.
Thank you. I'm Mike Zammerslow with United States Senator Jerry Moran's office. The senator asked me to share the following statement on his behalf. Wichita is located in the heart of our nation, and today we are grieving. I received confirmation this morning that no one survived the crash of American Airlines Flight 5342. This is a sad day for Kansans and our nation as we awaken this morning to this tragic news. My heart grieves for the lives that were lost and their loved ones, who are now learning that their friend or family member was among those who perished. There will be much to learn and to do in the coming days in the wake of this tragedy. But today, please join me in praying for Kansas. May God comfort those who are mourning. Mayor, thank you.
I would like to now ask our airports director, Jesse Romo, to provide some updates. And again, a lot of the details are still waiting for confirmation. And so we ask that Jesse give us the latest that we have confirmed.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Jesse Romo, Director of Airports, Wichita Airport Authority. I don't have a lot of official information to share. We will get that directly from NTSB. American Airlines will be providing the official updates and information. They do have a newsroom that you can go to online. The website is aa.com/newsroom. There's also an 800 number to utilize for the friends and family members of the people aboard the flight, 1-800-679-8215. I will say that airport staff did activate our family incident support team last night, and so if family members did show up to the terminal to have additional information, even for support, we were there with them with our team of volunteers, along with other airline staff and representatives. The airport remains open. There is air traffic continuing. Right now, we do have fog, so I would ask everybody to please drive safe as you're headed to the airport or are traveling today, and keep up with your airline for additional information. And right now, that's all I have. Thank you.
I would like to say that Director Jesse Romo, City Manager Bob Layton, and several council members were at the airport last night as the care team got activated. I also learned from American Airlines this morning that additional care team members have come to Wichita and will be providing support for families as well as crew members. I am in direct contact with American Airlines to find out the confirmed information to provide to all of you. But I want to reiterate that any information should go to their hotline, especially for families. And that number that Jesse said already, but I will remind everyone to use again, is 1-800-679-8215. In addition, this afternoon at high noon, the Wichita City Council, in contact with the Greater Wichita Ministerial League and multiple faith leaders in Wichita, will be coming together for a community-wide prayer. And we ask that anyone who would like to join us to come to City Hall here in downtown Wichita for that community prayer. All are welcome. At this time, our community needs to come together to support the family members who have been impacted, to come together in honor of those individuals on that flight. And as a council, we will lead in bringing this community together to pray for our community, but also move our community to know that there are resources. And as a city, we will have additional resources, especially for staff who have been impacted. And I am again grieving with everyone in our community and those in Washington, D.C. due to this very tragic incident that happened. We will take a few questions at this time.
You know how many of the passengers are Wichita residents versus traveling back home to D.C. or somewhere else?
At this time, we don't have that information, and I know that we don't have the manifest at this moment.
Have you spoken with any family or friends of members or people on the plane?
The care team was activated last night, and one family was there. And I want to say thank you to our local media partners who were respectful here in Wichita. That says a lot about our community. The care team was there to provide comfort for that family, and the council members were also there to provide comfort for them. But at this time, that is all we have in regards to family members.
Do you know how many families did show up last night?
Only one.
Was everything normal at the beginning of this flight taking off from Wichita?
Say that again.
Was the flight normal taking off?
I will have Jesse.
This is a press conference from Wichita happening right now.
Everything occurred as normal, so there was no abnormality to the operation.
Will this flight continue as normal tonight? Or is this flight on hold? Any changes in it?
I know Reagan National was shut down for a while. They have plans to reopen the airport, and I haven't heard yet when exactly they're going to open, and I haven't heard specifically for this flight. But if we do have additional information, that will come from American as well. And so if folks are looking to fly on that route, just need to continue to check with American Airlines.
Jesse, how many seats were on the plane on the 700? Is that 75, or do you know what it was configured to?
Well, good word. The configuration depends, for each aircraft, but it is approximately about 75 seats normally, and I would have to get specifics on that aircraft, but I don't have that at this time.
Has there been any contact with Bombardier, especially with this being an airplane?
No.
Do you know where they are in the process of contacting the families?
No, we do not. And, most of this incident occurred at D.C. and is being managed by the local partners and federal agencies that are responding in the D.C. area. But as was asked earlier, the manifest will be managed by American Airlines, and that information will be disseminated through their official sources as well as NTSB.
I know you said the flight was operating just fine. Was it delayed or was it delayed?
I don't believe so. I don't have that information, but I can look into that.
All right. Wichita officials addressing the nation here on KCMO 95.7 FM and streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Not clear on how many of those 60 passengers were Wichita residents or Kansans. We know there were multiple members of the U.S. figure skating team who were on that flight, returning back from an event that took place in the last few days down there in Wichita. One family showed up for the grieving that was offered last night at the airport. So more information is going to come on that. You heard there from Jesse Romo, who is the director of aviation at Eisenhower Airport. He did not know when DCA, that's Reagan Airport's opening back up. We do know it's opening back up at 11 a.m. Eastern time, 10 a.m. Central time. There was one flight from Kansas City scheduled to leave here in the last few minutes for Reagan. That flight was canceled. There are 4 more flights scheduled today from Kansas City to go to Reagan. The 3 in the afternoon are on. There's one at night on American that's been canceled, but it's not an American thing because American has a flight this afternoon going to DCA that is still, as of right now, on time, John.
We're working to get you the best sound quality we can as they kind of improvise these press conferences and things like that. We're at the mercy of wherever the person is in the room. Sometimes they're in the front row, and sometimes they're at the back of the room. So we We had it cranked as well as we could there on that one. So
Yeah.
it just kind of fluctuates just like the sports conferences and everything.
Exactly. So we'll keep monitoring this. Right now, it feels like Wichita is doing this. I mean, they're smart to do this, get in front of it. Mayor Wu's doing a pretty solid job there. But a lot of this is obviously being handled by Reagan and by American Airlines, and then you've got the FAA involved. There is clearly no issue, it appears as of right now at least, with the airline, what happened taking off from Wichita, and anything that happened in Wichita. It's just awful luck that Wichita obviously was on the receiving end of this.
Their issue this morning is fog like we're having, too, relative to their departures.
Yes, exactly. But we heard earlier this morning from a Cake News reporter, and she noted that there is not a peep being made inside of that airport this morning. You could hear a pin drop. It's business as usual, but you could hear a pin drop at Eisenhower Airport in Wichita this morning. Pete Mundo on KCMO 95.7 FM. We will continue to update you on this breaking news story this morning on KCMO Talk Radio, 913-408-7957. Of course, that's our studio line and our text line. I do have a very interesting tidbit that I will share with you regarding a congressman and a flight that he was on here in the last 36 hours or so. We'll get to that next. Well, I can share with you, according to a couple of sources, that Congressman Ron Estes, who represents the Wichita area, really that entire southwest, south central quadrant of the state of Kansas, he was on the plane coming back to Wichita that then returned in that tragic accident last night. We have reached out to the congressman, and we hope to get him on the show this morning if we can here on KCMO. No survivors are expected after this midair collision last night just outside of Reagan Airport between this flight coming in from Wichita on American Airlines 5342 and a Black Hawk helicopter. So this, obviously, the breaking and tragic story. We also have some news here that new Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is planning on speaking here momentarily. So when that does happen with Pete Hegseth, we will carry that as well here on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio. Now, how does this happen? That's the question that everybody is asking. Well, last night on CNN, Peter Muntian, an expert in this area, I thought did an excellent job explaining all this and sharing how something of this magnitude can happen right above the Potomac River, moments away from safely landing.
And so the helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, appeared to be coming from the right of the commercial flight that was descending into runway 33. It's a particularly perilous situation for pilots because they can often not see very well below them, as helicopter crews are often looking at the ground, flying primarily in reference to the ground, especially in a very critical phase of flying as a crew is descending, making that final critical approach to landing. They are focused primarily on the runway and primarily on their instruments. They're not necessarily looking left and right, scanning for other traffic. This may be something where the crew simply just did not have the ability to see the helicopter and the situation unfolding in front of them.
So, and it makes sense, and I talked to a couple of people who are in this line of work last night, and what they did confirm to me as well is that there's a couple of runways to use for Reagan. It's not a huge airport. Dulles is the big international airport that is 45 minutes outside of D.C. that, frankly, no one ever wants to go to. I went there once. Gosh, it would have been 2020. We only had Claire. And I will never go again.
There you go. You went there once?
Once. Reagan is a very convenient airport. It doesn't feel like a major city airport. It kind of reminds me of the old Kansas City airport, to be honest, in the way it just looks and feels. Very convenient. Here in Kansas City, we have a lot of flights that go to Reagan. Southwest and American both do it multiple times a day. So it's a much better airport. But there's two major ways to get into Reagan. There's two routes. One that kind of goes over Mount Vernon is the south route, and that's much easier. Then you've got the other runway that goes over the Potomac, which is what this American Airlines flight out of Wichita was on last night. And that one, as you hear Peter Muntian say there on CNN last night, is a much more difficult flight in terms of landing a plane in that situation. Never mind, it's at night. You're focused on having to stay over the Potomac River because they don't want planes over the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol building for obvious reasons. So you've got to stay over the Potomac. You've got to be hyper-focused. You've got to bank it hard back to the right, and you got to land the plane. And if you've got a helicopter who we know is on a training mission and is not paying attention, that's how you end up with this awful, awful tragedy that has resulted in no survivors and the plane being found in the Potomac broken into 3 different pieces, which is where things stand right now. Pete Mundo on KCMO Talk Radio. We'll take you up till the bottom of the hour. Of course, Fox News with the latest there. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. First couple of days on the job, and he is dealing with the worst U.S. air disaster in 15 years. 64 people on that plane, 3 on the helicopter. None are expected to survive. We also heard very early this morning from Washington, D.C. officials, including new Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. We'll share with you what he had to say. I thought it was very valuable stuff. They are going to leave no stone unturned. We'll share Sean Duffy's important remarks with you, unless we get the Pete Hegseth press conference, which is also moments away from happening on 95.7 FM KCMO. Well, the numbers right now, 67 feared dead in this midair collision between an American Airlines flight coming in from Wichita last night right outside of Reagan Airport and the Black Hawk helicopter that collided moments before the plane was set to safely land coming in from Wichita. Pete Hegseth is set to address the nation momentarily as the new Secretary of Defense. We do have an update courtesy of Fox News from Hegseth in a statement. Reading here, it was an annual proficiency training flight that Black Hawk helicopter was on. It was a fairly experienced crew that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles. The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, was granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions, as what happened is under review. That is the official statement right now from Pete Hegseth. He is going to be addressing the nation momentarily in what is now the worst U.S. air disaster in 15 years, and no survivors are expected at this time, with that death count expected to be right at 67, 64 from the plane, and 3 from that Black Hawk helicopter. In the meantime, 2 hours ago, early this morning, before many of you maybe were up, we did have a press conference out of Washington, D.C. It included these comments from new Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy.
Safety is our expectation. Everyone who flies in American skies expects that we fly safely, that when you depart an airport, you get to your destination. That didn't happen last night. And I know that President Trump, his administration, the FAA, the DOT, we will not rest until we have answers for the families and for the flying public. You should be assured that when you fly, you're safe.
That is Sean Duffy, and I'm glad that he made those statements loud and clear. In America in 2025, there should be no questions about airline safety. And you know as well as I do that that is now a change. Now, we have short-term memories. We all understand that. But for the time being, as we heard very early this morning from our friend down at Cake News in Wichita, Pilar Pedraza, she had a reporter down there at Eisenhower Airport, and she said that they could hear a pin drop. So this now is going to create a conversation around what the future of Reagan Airport is going to be because of how crowded that airspace typically is. I found this story from going back 20 years now, shortly after September 11th, when there was a push to close Reagan and just have everybody use Dulles, with the thought being that after the September 11th attacks, well, we just cannot have major airlines flying into airspace that is right near the White House, the Capitol, the Pentagon, everything else. after, the Pentagon obviously got hit by a plane that day. Well, what ended up happening is, frankly, politicians were able to lobby to keep it open. Republicans and Democrats in particular used a litany of arguments to reopen the airport, which took weeks more than every other airline or every other airport in America took to reopen. Most major airports reopened a few days after the September 11th attacks. Reagan stayed closed for 3 more weeks. They had to figure out what to do with it. And lawmakers, one of their arguments was that, well, Reagan actually, and the proximity to the White House and the Capitol made it less susceptible to terrorism, which does make some sense, right? You're right there. You've got plenty of defense folks. I mean, within shouting distance of this airport, it probably is less likely for, God forbid, some type of horrific terrorism event to take place right there. You might focus somewhere else in the country if, God forbid, you're wanting to do something like that. Now, this is not a terrorism conversation. Let's be very clear. No one is making that accusation. There are no reports about it. But it's just more about the history of Reagan Airport, and it has been a complex one going back decades now. It's incredibly convenient. If you've been to Washington, D.C., you do not want to fly into Dulles. You want to fly into Reagan. But it's a very crowded airspace because you cannot fly over, obviously, the bulk of Washington, D.C. You've got a couple of runways to get in and out of. If you're coming from the direction this Wichita flight was coming from, you've got to stay over the Potomac River, and you just have a very busy airspace there. And now we know, based on the confirmation from Pete Hegseth this morning, that this was just an annual proficiency training flight. You had a fairly experienced crew that was just kind of doing its thing. Required annual night evaluation. They probably do this stuff in their sleep. They don't really think about it. They had on their night vision goggles. And they're just like, it's kind of like you taking your training, right? At your local business, if you work for a major corporation. All right, time for the annual training. It's different when you're flying a Black Hawk helicopter, but it's very relatable. For these guys or gals, we don't know who exactly was on that Black Hawk helicopter yet, but for them, they didn't think anything of this, I'm sure. It was routine. But something happened, and clearly something was missed. So we are awaiting Pete Hegseth, new Department of Defense Secretary. He is expected to take the podium for a press conference here in the next few minutes. We'll carry it on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We have heard from and talked to many people this morning, and you've heard from Roger Marshall as well. He has been at the front lines of this. The Kansas U.S. Senator has been, he was really one of the first ones down there yesterday and last night when all this was breaking. So he has done a very good job updating us back here in Kansas on what is going on. And his last post on X from the Kansas U.S. Senator was a Bible verse, Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. That is the last update we have at 6:36 this morning from Kansas U.S. Senator Roger Marshall. Right now, Jay Ratliff, an aviation expert, is talking to Fox News. Let's carry some of this as we await the Pete Hegseth press conference.
Very thorough job. And again, honor the lives of those that were so tragically lost. It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, Jay, when we were listening to the congressman from Tennessee, Mark Green, describe what you would see from another aircraft at that time of night under those conditions, it's well illuminated. Just to paraphrase him, he said it's hard to miss. And just to match some of, try and draft a little bit off of what Jennifer Griffin was reporting for the Pentagon. Reuters has this quote up now from the brand new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who says this helicopter was on an annual proficiency training flight by fairly experienced crew, in quotes, with night vision goggles. I don't know if you have experience with this, Jay, but if you're wearing night vision goggles, how does your environment change when you're getting that close to another aircraft at that low of an altitude?
Well, the night vision can actually enhance a lot of what's already there. And keep in mind, you're talking about a very densely populated area. There's a lot of lights. There's a lot of things that would compete for a pilot's attention. And the ultimate responsibility when you're flying visual flight rules falls on the VFR crew to make sure that they visually have ample airspace between them and any other aircraft in the area. So it's incumbent upon them to constantly be making sure that there's no other aircraft anywhere near them. And in that panoramic cockpit that you have on the Black Hawk, you can see a lot of different areas from one peripheral vision side to the other. So the thought process is here, could there have been something that distracted them? Could they simply not have seen it? It's possible they could have been confused. And that's one of the other reasons that we rely on air traffic control as we do, because they're there to help mitigate or reduce as much as possible the human element, the human factor, the human error that sometimes takes place in commercial aviation accidents. Because when you look at that, typically there's a series of things that go wrong, and a component of that tends to be human error. And if that's the case of what took place here, what can we do to try to prevent that in the future?
Sure.
So, again,
Jay Ratliff, aviation expert, just now on Fox News with Bill Hemmer. 913-408-7957. The Pete Hegseth press conference is supposed to be coming up momentarily. We'll get it to you right here on 95.7 FM KCMO and streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Now, it is known as well that many of the victims on that plane coming back from Wichita to Washington, D.C., had many from the U.S. figure skating world. And we have this new statement here from Doug Zegbee, CEO, Executive Director of the skating club, in Boston, saying that our sport and this club has suffered a horrible loss with this tragedy. Skating is a tight-knit community where parents and kids come together 6 or 7 days a week and train and work. Everyone is like family. We are devastated and completely at a loss for words. These athletes, coaches, and parents were returning from U.S. Figure Skating's National Development Camp following last week's U.S. Championships in Wichita. This camp is for young, competitive skaters of tomorrow with the most promise to be a champion of tomorrow. The club sent 18 athletes to compete at the U.S. Championships. It sent 12 athletes to the National Development Camp. So it's possible that as the names come out after the next of kin get notified, there could be many members of the Skating Club of Boston involved after they just put out this statement here in the last couple of minutes. So that is something to monitor as well, as we are monitoring a potential, or we know it's coming up, we just don't know when, a Pete Hegseth press conference as the new Department of Defense. Obviously an incredibly tragic and busy first week on the job for him. You've got a situation where this is the worst airline crash in 15 years, and it is still one that has right now more questions to it than answers. Now, I will add this to the conversation as well, and I think this needs to be noted. Like many of you, when you heard this news last night, you probably went on social media, you started scrolling through your feed. And I'll tell you what, it is amazing in a horrible way how political some people want to make this out to be right out of the gates. We don't know how many people are dead. We don't know how many people are alive. And there are people across the board. This is not a left or right thing. Across the board who just want to make it a grand conspiracy and or political. Now, listen, I'm not closing the door on anything. I don't think we should until we get some answers. And I do admit I trust a lot of the people in charge to get those answers. But my gosh, I was looking at some of the stuff last night. It's just horrific. You had some people, and depending on which side you want to start on, I mean, we can do it either way. But you've got people on both sides who are looking at this thing and saying, oh, man, this was all about assassinating or trying to take down a Trump official or trying to hurt Trump in his first week in office. And then you got the people on the left trying to blame Donald Trump as quickly as they can because he's trying to shrink the size of the 2 million employees that the taxpayers employ in this country. Neither of those things are responsible ways to go about this in the hours after a crash. Like, I get it. Yes, we have questions. And we should have questions as to how this happens in America in 2025, that a Black Hawk helicopter, you've seen the video. If you haven't, it's all over social media, just flying right through the sky and barrels into a commercial jet that's moments away from landing. But my gosh, I mean, if you're going to go down that road with some grandiose conspiracy, there's got to be something to attach it to. And there isn't right now. It literally does not exist. There was one that suggested that CNN had articles pre-written about the crash 5 to 6 hours beforehand. And you know where this came from? Because when you Googled plane crash Reagan, whatever it might be, you would see on Google that the update was from 7 hours ago, which is before the crash had taken place. As someone who has worked in the digital space fairly extensively beyond radio, I can share with you what happened here. What happened is CNN tried to, and they all do it, every website does this in the world that knows what it's doing. They tried to update a previously written article to then have that article, which already had SEO juice behind it, that strength search engine optimization. They tried to update that article to get it to rank at the top of Google. There's nothing nefarious about that. As someone who has owned websites, everyone does it. If you can take an article that's previously been written and it already has the SEO juice behind it, and then update it with a massive news story, if you can figure out a way to tie those stories together, you've got a potential home run on your hands where you're going to rank at the very top of Google. This thought that, oh man, CNN knew about this 7 hours ago. They had the article already pre-written and up. It's like, come on. I mean, goodness gracious. You believing in the boogeyman too? Come on. And then on the other side, you've got people like Bakari Sellers, who appears on cable news all the time, going out there and saying, oh, this is all Trump. Trump. Oh, this is what happens when you try to defund the government. You got another guy here, Aaron Rupar. He's, one of the worst trolls on social media. And he shares a headline literally minutes after this crash happens. Trump guts key aviation safety committee, fires head of TSA and Coast Guard. As if, yes, the TSA chieftain was the guy who would have been in the air traffic control center at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night at Reagan Airport. Once again, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, it's so insulting to common sense Americans who are looking at this as the tragedy that it is, who are grieving, and you've got social media as just, frankly, a corrupting tool for people who are looking for something that doesn't exist. And the worst part is some of them think they're thinking clearly. Some of them think they're actually getting to the bottom of something. Instead, we've just got to follow the story. I mean, that's I think whether you're in this business or not, that's just, as an American, that's the responsible thing to do.